Today, it is my privilege to introduce Professor Carol Steiker. There will not be a formal Q&A, but Professor Steiker will be available afterwards to chat with students. Professor Steiker is the Henry J. Friendly Professor of Law and Faculty Co-Director of the Criminal Justice Policy Program. She specializes in the broad field of criminal justice, where her work ranges from substantive criminal law to criminal procedure to institutional design, with a special focus on issues related to capital punishment. Professor Steiker is a graduate of Harvard Law School, where she served as president of the Harvard Law Review, the second woman to hold that position in its then 99-year history. After clerking for Judge J. Skelly Wright of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals and Justice Thurgood Marshall of the U.S. Supreme Court, she worked as a staff attorney for the Public Defender Service for the District of Columbia, representing indigent defendants at all stages of the criminal process. In addition to her scholarly work, Professor Steiker has worked on pro bono litigation projects on behalf of indigent criminal defendants, including death penalty cases in the U.S. Supreme Court. She has also served as a consultant and expert witness on issues of criminal justice for nonprofit organizations and has testified before Congress and state legislators. I was fortunate enough to take Professor Steiker's capital punishment course, which was hands down the best course I've taken at the law school. I vividly remember the first day. We all filed in to Langdon North, searched for the perfect seat for the semester, and settled in, chatting with our friends and neighbors as we waited for class to begin. Professor Steiker, at the front of the classroom, didn't say a word, but somehow her presence alone lulled everyone to silence. The room was still, and several moments passed as she gazed out across the sea of eager students. Slowly and deliberately, she began reading from an excerpt about the Scottsboro Boys case, in which 9 African-American teenagers, ages 13 to 19, were falsely accused in Alabama of raping 2 white women on a train in 1931. That moment stands out because it exemplifies the type of professor Professor Steiker is, a professor that students dream of and that other professors seek to emulate, a professor who does not shy away from the tough conversations, one that encourages her students to lean in when things get hard and who does the same herself, a genuine badass, for lack of a better word, a woman who isn't afraid to drop the occasional F-bomb while effortlessly commanding a room, ever more impressive in an institution that was created for and continues to be dominated by men. Professor Steiker, thank you for consistently challenging us to think critically about the most difficult topics in our society, for allowing us space to empathize and recognize the humanity in those who are so quickly demonized and ostracized by our legal system, for pushing us to examine the power, the limitations, and the responsibility of the law in shaping a better, more just society, and for being an example of strength, brilliance, and fierce dedication to combating grave injustice. Without further ado, Professor Carol Steiker.
Nimat, thank you so much for that terrific introduction. I've never been introduced as a badass before, so that's going to go down on the bucket list. I am honored and delighted to be asked to address you as your graduation grows near, class of 2018. And I have to say, my own children, who are in their early 20s, never ask me for advice. And they rarely listen to it when it's offered. So this is a super treat for me. Settle in. In thinking about what to say to you today, I was reminded of this old TV game show from my childhood in which people had 2 minutes to roll their carts through the supermarket trying to rack up the highest cost bill for their groceries. Is that still around? You ever seen that one? It's a great show. So as I was thinking about what to say to you, I was racking my brain for kind of the champagne and caviar of advice to give to you. But what I eventually came to is more prosaic. Instead of kind of special occasion wisdom, I want to talk about just an everyday kind of thing that we do all the time. I want to talk about making choices. During your time in law school and during my longer time here at the law school, students come to me all the time asking for advice about decisions they have to make, choices they have to make. What should their 1L elective be? What courses should they take as 2Ls or 3Ls? What summer job should they apply to? Should they write an independent paper? Should they apply for a clerkship? And overwhelmingly, when I give advice about these choices, my advice is really it doesn't matter that much. None of these choices seem to me to be that important, and students seem to imbue them with much more importance than they have. But now suddenly, here you are on the cusp of graduation, about to go out into the world, and the choices that you're about to make are genuinely consequential. You'll be entering jobs that hopefully will last longer than a summer or a year. You'll be building skills that will set you on one path rather than another. You'll be entering into relationships that will be longer than a night or a weekend or a couple of months. And that may even be lifelong. So these choices are really different. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how to think about those choices. Not how to make those choices, but rather what's at stake for you in making these choices. And I have 2 points I want to make about choices. One is that choosing wisely is more important than you might think it is. And my second point is that choosing wisely is less important than you might think it is. So listen up. For each of these 2 points, I'm going to invoke a little literary help and give you some examples from my own life, and then I'm going to stop. So, choosing wisely is more important than you might think it is. I really came to this topic because I was trying to put myself back when I was sitting where you are. I graduated from the law school in 1986. 25 years old, and I was trying to think of what I didn't know then that I feel like I do know now. And one thing that I think I know now that I'm quite sure I didn't know or believe when I was 25 was how much my choices in work, in love, would affect me, would change me. I, at 25, believed that I was who I was. I had a lot of opinions. I felt myself to be more or less fully formed, and I wasn't completely wrong about that. But what I didn't realize was that life experiences really do have a way of shaping you and turning you subtly and slowly, but truly, into the person that you become. They don't transform you, but there are many different people within you that you could be. And your choices will nudge you slowly and gently toward one version or another of yourself. And to illustrate this, I want to share with you one of my favorite books, a story from one of my favorite books when I was a kid. It's probably one you don't know. No one seems to know this book. I loved this book. It's called The Diamond in the Window by Jane Langdon. Anyone know that book? One person has heard of this book. My kids both had to read The Fledgling by Jane Langdon. You know that book? They both had to read it in middle school. Diamond in the Window, much better. Diamond in the Window is this book about 2 kids, a brother and a sister, growing up in Concord, Massachusetts, and they live in an old Victorian house, and they share an attic bedroom that has a diamond-shaped window. And it turns out that this diamond-shaped window has magical properties. And what starts to happen in the book is that the brother and the sister start to have the same dreams that they're both present in, and they remember when they wake up, and then these dreams begin to have an influence on their actual living real life. I'm not going to go into the story gets kind of complicated, but the dreams are very beautiful and metaphorical, and one of the dreams in the book is one of my favorite chapters. It's called The Hall of Mirrors. And in it, the 2 kids who are named Eleanor and Edward, the girl and the boy, they're in the dream, and they're each standing in front of their own V-shaped mirror. And they can see 2 images of themselves in this mirror. But the images are not entirely the same. They're slightly different, the two images that they see. Now, I have to, just to go forward with the story, I have to give you a little warning. This book was written more than 50 years ago, and it's deeply sexist, something that like totally went over my head when I was a kid, but you'll see what I mean as I tell you the story. So what you need to know about the kids is Edward has this dream of being kind of an Indiana Jones type explorer. He even has a name for this person he's going to be when he grows up, which is his name spelled backwards. Eleanor's ambitions, she has a face full of freckles, and she dreams about being elegant and beautiful and getting rid of the freckles. So as they look, I told you. So as they look at their images, Eleanor notices, that one of the images has a little face powder covering up the freckles. And Edward notices that one of his images has a kind of swashbuckling air. And they reach out to touch those images, and they realize there's no glass there. These aren't mirrors. They're doors, and they can step through them. So they eagerly step through their chosen image, and immediately two more images, two more doors open up, each slightly different. And the kids begin to step through the different mirrors. But ultimately, their images start to age, and they begin to see adult versions of themselves based on the doors they've entered previously. But they don't like what they see. Edward's choices yield adults who seem kind of reckless and cruel, even. And Eleanor's choices yield adult versions of herself that are kind of shallow and vain. And the kids are really distressed by these future selves that they see, and they try to fight their way back, try to work back to the earlier, younger choices. But it's very difficult. They get confused. They get lost. They almost don't make it. But after travails, they make it back far enough that they're able to make different choices. And this time, they look carefully and more thoughtfully, and they make serious, thoughtful choices. And then they see a different array of adult choices, adult selves open up to them. And here's where it's really nauseating. So Edward sees all of these interesting adult things, including, could it be, there he is sitting in the Oval Office. And Eleanor sees all kinds of lovely futures for herself, and her equivalent of the Oval Office is she's a grandmother with lovely children and grandchildren. Okay, despite the groan-worthy gender stereotypes in this book, there is a lovely wisdom in this story. It's not one big choice that transforms us, but rather small choices that nudge us imperceptibly toward different versions of ourselves. And these can accrete over time to work really significant changes in who we are. And it's really difficult to undo those changes once we realize that we've become someone that we didn't really want to be. So I found this to be true in my own life. So my choice to work as a public defender early in my career for about 4 years really shaped me in profound ways that I didn't realize was going to be the case when I chose the job. So I chose to be a public defender for a variety of reasons. When I was a student at the law school, I came to law school not thinking at all that I wanted to be a public defender. I'm not even sure I knew what a public defender was. But in law school, I got very interested in criminal justice. As a law clerk, I was really drawn toward criminal cases. I clerked in DC, and so it turns out people in my family knew some people at PDS, and I got to know people at PDS, and I decided, and I read a book about PDS written by a former lawyer, and I decided that was what I wanted to do. And part of what drew me to the work of a public defender was, maybe oddly enough, my own experience growing up as a suburban Jewish kid in the US. Because when I was around 12, I got very immersed in kind of the standard American Jewish girl literature around the Holocaust. So I read Anne Frank, I read Elie Wiesel. I had terrible nightmares about these books, and I was really shocked and puzzled by how people could have viewed an entire people, my people, the Jews, as somehow less than human. And so, to me, thinking about the criminal justice system, it kind of appeared to me that in an era in which that kind of prejudice is at least frowned upon in most circles, it's still perfectly okay and encouraged to hate criminals for what they do. And when it's easy to hate, when it's encouraged to hate someone, it's easy to think that maybe we can, change our procedures just a little bit in these cases. When you've got in front of you someone who's charged with raping a child, for example, you might think, yes, our system makes all kinds of promises about the way we're supposed to treat criminal defendants, but maybe not today, right? Maybe we could just cut a few corners to be sure that this one goes away. And it was thinking about that and the way we hate and celebrate in some ways our hatred of criminals and the way in which that leads us to see them, want to see them as less than human, and to organize even our institutions around that, made me think that being a public defender was in some way a kind of extreme civil rights work, that standing shoulder to shoulder next to the people that it's easiest and most encouraged to revile was a way of protecting everyone else, whether it's the Jews or other religious minorities or racial or ethnic or sexual minorities who some days, at some places, it's safe to hate. And saying, no, I'm going to stand up for the dignity and respect of this person, and by doing that, protecting all of us from the dehumanization that sometimes happens. So that was my kind of inchoate thinking about being a public defender. And I gave that speech many times during my time as a public defender because I very often get the question, but what if your clients are guilty? How can you defend those people? Why would you want to do this kind of work? And that was the true reason. That was the way I saw the work and why I thought the work was so important. And it still remains important to me. I'm still moved by that. I still do death penalty work for precisely that reason. But the public defender service gave me some things and changed me in ways that I did not anticipate. And it's taken me kind of a while even to see it and to be able to articulate it. So how did being a public defender early in my career as a young lawyer from age 27 to age 31, how did that shape me? Well, one thing it did is it really helped me see more clearly my own privilege. So I thought I knew about poverty. I had done my share of volunteer work at community service. But my first year as a public defender, I was put, as all new PDS lawyers were, in juvenile court. And so I represented kids charged with crimes for a year. And that was a lot more social work than it was really litigation. We almost always lost our trials because juveniles don't have a right to jury trials. They have bench trials. It's very hard to convince a judge to acquit a juvenile respondent, as they're euphemistically called. So we did a lot of social work coming up with dispositional alternatives for our clients, placements that would be truly rehabilitative rather than having them locked up in the horrifying juvenile detention center. So I spent a lot of time with my juvenile clients, with their families, with their teachers, in their schools, at their churches. And I still remember, one client's home that was just crawling with cockroaches. Literally my gorge rose every time I went into his house. It smelled awful. There was garbage everywhere. Then there was another client's home that was completely immaculate, but had almost no furniture and very little food in the house. And then there was my very first juvenile client who had only one pair of shoes that were 2 or 3 sizes too small. And so he had to fold his toes under in order to wear those shoes. I took that kid out and bought him a pair of sneakers that fit because it was just so horrifying to see him hobbling around in these ill-fitting shoes. And those images have just stayed with me for the rest of my life and have governed a lot about how I think about what I ought to be doing with my life, thinking about, writing about, working on. And those images really stayed with me as I raised my own very privileged children, and the contrast between my own kids' lives and my former clients' lives. In a related way, my work as a public defender worked against my own tendency toward know-it-all, self-righteous characteristics, which I have to say, being a law professor does nothing but bolster. No, really. So these kind of arrogant tendencies were born of thinking that my successes were largely the product of my own great talents and hard work. And working as a public defender made me realize how much luck has to do with people's life stories and trajectories, and how little my own talents and hard work, which, exist, but put them in their place in terms of creating the future that I've been lucky enough to have. Clarence Darrow, who's one of the most famous criminal defense attorneys of the 20th century, in arguing to save the lives of Leopold and Loeb, two teenage clients who had committed murder, argued to the judge they didn't make themselves. He was arguing for the influence of their own background and experiences on their crimes. And being a public defender, that is the credo. There but for the grace of God go I. That is, at base, the public defender's credo. We understand and need to communicate the ways in which our clients' lives, our lives, are shaped by many forces beyond our control. And finally, being a public defender worked against, I think, one of my least attractive qualities throughout my life, which was the desire to please people in authority. I was always a good girl. I was always really good at school. Parents loved me. Teachers loved me. I won all kinds of prizes, and I grooved to all that approbation from people in authority. And you all, come on, you all know it. The H-bomb, it doesn't work very well here where everyone goes to Harvard. But go out in the world and modestly say that you go to Harvard. It's great, right? You get a lot of stroking from all the people in important authority positions for being successful in the ways that I was successful, in the ways that you've been successful. Being a public defender, a big part of the job of being a public defender is pissing off the big daddies in the robes, that you really have to stand up for your client at times and get yelled at, and go to parties where people say, how can you do that work? You get a certain amount of head patting within your little circle, but in the wider world, you have to take a lot of crap for being a public defender. And that was really good for me. I really needed that. It freed me, in a way, from my lifelong reliance on everyone patting me on the head. So I'll tell you a story about this when I really realized for the first time how much I had moved from my previous self, how many mirror doors I had stepped through. So my first year, I told you I was representing juvenile clients. And one client I represented, we would pick up cases. We'd be assigned to pick up cases on a certain day when the people who'd been arrested the night before were about to be arraigned. So in the morning, we'd go to the lockup. The lockup was just a big cage filled with 50 kids who'd been arrested the night before. And I'd walk up and down in front of the bars calling out my client's name. So I'm calling out my client's name, Jim Jones. I'm like, Jim Jones, Jim Jones. Nobody's coming to the bars. Finally, a kid comes to the bars, and he's like, come on over here. So I go over, and he says, listen, I told them that my name was Jim Jones, but I'm not really Jim Jones. I'm Sam Smith. I told them I was Jim Jones because that's my half-brother, and I know his Social Security number, and he doesn't have a record. So I figured they might release me if they thought I was Jim Jones. I have a record. I know they're going to lock me up if they know that I'm Sam Smith. I'm like, all right, okay. Now I'm like, I got, 2 minutes before I have to go up to the courtroom and do whatever I'm going to do. So I know I think I know that I shouldn't tell the judge that my client, Jim Jones, is really Sam Smith. That's a secret of my client that I'm supposed to keep. On the other hand, I'm not supposed to commit a fraud on the court. So usually when I stand up in court, I would say, Carol Steiker for Jim Jones. So I was like, maybe I won't say that. So I said what most of the other lawyers who didn't know their client's name said would say, I said Carol Steiker for the respondent. I thought that was a little safer. So I say Carol Steiker for the respondent. And my mind is racing, like, should I argue that he doesn't have a criminal record so that he should get out? And, but I'm saved from that problem because the prosecutor is just looking at, these things move really fast. Like, I see that he doesn't have a criminal record. The state doesn't oppose release on recognizance. Boom, the judge releases my client. But 6 weeks later, the first status hearing on the case comes. And of course, Jim Jones doesn't show up. And so, of course, the judge issues an arrest warrant for Jim Jones. So Jim Jones, the poor half-brother, who has no idea what's going on, gets arrested. But I have a feeling that he must have known something was up, because ordinarily, if he were arrested, I would be immediately called to come represent him. But that isn't what happened. His family hired a lawyer. And that lawyer hit me with a subpoena to come to court and testify that Jim Jones was not my client. I'm like, is that a secret of my client? Am I allowed to go and say that Jim Jones is not my client? And then they might ask me, well, who is your client? So I go to my supervisor, who was at the time the deputy director of PDS, later became the director, Amani Davis, Angela Jordan Davis. And she's like, oh, better do some research. So I'm like, better do it fast, because it's 9:30 in the morning, and I'm subpoenaed to court at 2 in the afternoon. So I do some research, do about an hour of research. I can't find anything about this. So I'm like, what am I supposed to do? She said, all right, we're going to call bar counsel. So there's a group of, they are the ethics council of the DC bar, and they are the ones who prosecute people who steal their clients' money. But they're also available for consultation. So call them up, and I explain the situation. And they're like, oh, that's really interesting. OK, we're going to look into that. We'll get back to you. I'm like, all right, now it's 11 o'clock. OK, but you better get back to me soon, because I have to go to court at 2 o'clock. So at 1 o'clock, they call me back, and they say, yeah, there are 5 lawyers in our office. We really disagree about what the answer to this question is. 3 of us think it is a secret of your client that you shouldn't reveal. 2 of us think that is not a secret of your client, and you have to tell the court what's going on. So that's what we got for you. I'm like, okay. So I tell my supervisor, she says, listen, you got 3 of them on your side. I would let's stick with this. We're gonna protect your client's secret. But she said, bring your toothbrush, because the judge may hold you in contempt. So I'm like, okay. So we go to court. And the lawyer calls me to the stand, swears me in as a witness, and points to his client. He says, Ms. Steiker, is this the Jim Jones that you represented in juvenile court 6 weeks ago? And I say, I'm sorry, I'm not at liberty to answer that question. I've contacted bar counsel, and a majority of them agreed that this was a secret of my client that I'm not at liberty to reveal. And the lawyer does honestly exactly what I would have done. He said, Your Honor, my client's liberty is at stake, and so I'm going to have to ask you to require Ms. Steiker to answer this question, or to be held in contempt of court until she's willing to answer the question. That's civil contempt, right? You get jailed until you're willing to answer the question. You hold the keys to the jail cell in your hand as long as you comply. And this judge is a very impatient judge. And I could see he was just very irritated by this whole thing. When the lawyer does that, the bailiff starts moving toward me, jingling with the handcuffs. And the judge is like, hold on. Don't we take pictures of people when we arrest them? And it's like, everyone's like, oh, yeah, OK. So he says, Ms. Steiker, you can go. So I didn't get held in contempt. And they did figure out that it wasn't my client. But I realized in that moment where I'm sitting on the stand and the lawyer is calling for the judge to hold me in contempt and the bailiff is moving toward me with the handcuffs, I'm like, do it, do it, do it. Like, hold me in contempt. I want to go to jail. I wasn't married yet. I didn't have kids. I thought, like, this would be, like, the ultimate, like, cred. Come on, Big Daddy, send me to jail. Send me to jail. It would, like, that was the new me. And I realized that this would not have gone over well at home. I could just see my parents. How's Carol? She's in jail right now. But that was an example of how the choice to be a public defender pushed some of my tendencies, further and sort of worked against some of my tendencies. It really shaped me and continues to shape me to this day. So that's why I'm saying that choices may be more important than you think, because they shape not just your skills and your knowledge and your well of experiences that you draw, and they really can shape your character to a certain extent. But on to my second point. Choices may be less important than you think they are. And to make this point, I want to read you a poem and also then give you some examples. So the poem is called The God Who Loves You by a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet named Carl Dennis. So I like to look at poems. I can't just hear them, so I'm putting it up for those of you who want to read along with me. I mean, not out loud, but as I read it to you. The God Who Loves You. It must be troubling for the God who loves you to ponder how much happier you'd be today had you been able to glimpse your many futures. It must be painful for him to watch you on Friday evenings, driving home from the office, content with your week, 3 fine houses sold to deserving families, knowing as he does exactly what would have happened had you gone to your second choice for college, knowing the roommate you'd have been allotted, whose ardent opinions on painting and music would have kindled in you a lifelong passion, a life 30 points above the life you're living on any scale of satisfaction. And every point a thorn in the side of the God who loves you. You don't want that. A large-souled man like you who tries to withhold from your wife the day's disappointments so she can save her empathy for the children. And would you want this God to compare your wife with the woman you were destined to meet on that other campus? It hurts you to think of him ranking the conversation you'd have enjoyed over there higher in insight than the conversation you're used to. And think how this loving God would feel, knowing that the man next in line for your wife would have pleased her more than you ever will, even on your best days when you really try. Can you sleep at night, believing a God like that is pacing his cloudy bedroom, harassed by alternatives you're spared by ignorance? The difference between what is and what could have been will remain alive for him even after you cease existing. After you catch a chill running out in the snow for the morning paper, losing 11 years that the God who loves you will feel compelled to imagine, scene by scene, unless you come to the rescue by imagining him no wiser than you are, no God at all, only a friend, no closer than the actual friend you made at college, the one you haven't written in months. Sit down tonight and write him about the life you can talk about with a claim to authority, the life you've witnessed, which for all you know is the life you've chosen. So I love this poem because it shows just how you can make yourself crazy by agonizing over past choices. And it shows you this by displacing this pain onto a non-existent, I think, omniscient God who loves you, right? Imagining how that God would suffer, knowing about choices you've made that are less optimal. The poem suggests that you should be kind to that God, a large-souled man like yourself. You should be kind to that God. Be kind to yourself by not torturing yourself with all the woulda, coulda, shouldas that you might have about choices that you've made in the past. Instead, the poem tells us to inhabit the present, to move forward with our choices. This is the first time, this is where the poem switches to the imperative. It says, sit down tonight, directs you, sit down tonight and write to that friend, the real friend that you made in college, about your real life, about your choices, and move forward. Don't dwell. So that's one piece of advice. I'm telling you how important it is. Your choices are. They shape you. They shape your life. But you can't dwell. Don't look back. Don't dwell and torture yourself. But the poem has a more radical meaning. It more radically undermines the belief that choosing wisely, choosing well, leads to the best life. Think of this example here. The guy goes to his first choice college, and he misses out on that great roommate who will ignite a lifelong passion for the arts. He misses out on the wife he would have married, the woman he would have met at his second choice college. What this suggests is that even if we choose as wisely as we know how, choose the best we can, so much is luck and serendipity. Often what can seem like a mistake or a failure is the best thing that could happen to us if the you in the poem hadn't gotten into his first choice college. He would have felt that as a failure, as a loss. But think how it would have changed his life for the better. And I think that's an important thing to realize. You'll never know. None of us are an omniscient God who can know whether our choices were the best ones or whether our failures were the best things that could have happened to us. So I'll give you two brief examples from my own life. So at the age of 21, I applied to law school, and I ended up choosing to go to Harvard Law School over Yale Law School because I had a boyfriend here at Harvard who was in grad school at the time. Very dumb reason. If any of you did that, it's dumb. Dumb reason to choose to go to grad school at the age of 21. And of course, that boyfriend did not last through law school. And in fact, my future husband, my husband now of 28 years, was at Yale Law School at the time that I was at Harvard Law School with the boyfriend that didn't work out. Now, it turns out I may not have ended up being married to my now husband had I gone to Yale Law School at the age of, actually went at age 22. I don't think either he or I was ready at that point in our lives for a serious relationship. If we'd gotten involved, we probably would have gotten involved and broken up. And who knows if I'd be married at all or married to him at this point. So I have my happy marriage. I have myself making a dumb choice for a relationship that didn't work out to thank for my marriage of coming up on 30 years. There you go. I'm like living proof of the wisdom of this poem. Another story. When I was a 2L, it was the go-go 80s. I needed to earn money to help pay for law school. That was kind of a deal that we had. I had to earn a certain amount of my living expenses over the summer. So I applied to work at law firms, even though I wasn't very interested in law firm life. But one of the law firms that I applied to offered, knowing that I had all this public interest, this and that all over my resume, and in my interviews that wasn't very smart, but they said, tell you what, you can come work for our law firm. We'll pay you a full summer salary, and you can work half the summer for us and half the summer for a public interest organization of your choice. I'm like, sold. And they're like, well, what are you interested in? We could help you get a public interest job. We have lots of connections here with our firm. What are you interested in? I'm like, I don't really know, but I'm getting kind of interested in criminal justice. And they're like, perfect, because the two lawyers who interviewed me were a woman named Mary Jo White, who had been a former AUSA in the Southern District, who later became the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District and the head of the SEC. And the other lawyer was John Codall, who had worked with Mary Jo White at the Southern District U.S. Attorney's Office and is now and has been for a zillion years a federal judge in the Southern District. And they're like, we both worked in the Southern District. It's the best office in the world. You know, we have lots of connections there, no problem. We can get you in, and you could work there for half the summer and work for this Debevoise and Plimpton. Maybe I shouldn't say it. Debevoise and Plimpton for the other half of the summer. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. Because here were these two fancy lawyers telling me this was the best job in the world in the Southern District. Even I had heard of that, even though I knew virtually nothing about anything about law. So I said, I'm going to do that. And then I became the head of the law review after I got this great deal set up. And the law review was in complete chaos. The board that was in charge when I was a 2L, the 3Ls, graduated, and they hadn't published 4 of their 8 issues or edited them. They were all very angry at each other. They were only communicating by memo, and they just graduated. They graduated and left, and the new board, we had 4 issues. This is like more than 1,000 pages of law review articles, many of them by professors here, that hadn't been subcited, they hadn't been edited, they hadn't been, blue booked. So we decided that the 7 of us on the board would spend the summer doing all the subciting, all the blue booking, all the typing in of all the changes, and that we do it in a rotating thing so that each of us would get 3 weeks of work. So like, Debevoise was not into 1.5 weeks and 1.5 weeks of splitting the summer. So I ended up regretfully saying that I couldn't work at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I went to Debevoise and took the money, and that was it. And I was very disappointed at the time. It seemed like such a great deal, and I had heard such great things about the U.S. Attorney's Office. This was like the me that like relied on what people in positions of authority thought were the best jobs. But it turns out, I'm quite sure that PDS would not have hired me if my only experience in criminal justice had been working as a federal prosecutor for half a summer. I didn't do clinics when I was in law school, to my regret today, because I was doing all this law review stuff. So it turned out that that very disappointing experience of having to give up this cool split summer turned out to be a really good thing for my future self. So those were 2 mistakes, failures, things that didn't work out that ultimately, I think, were really lucky in my life and helped create my life today, which is, I don't know if it's happier than it would have been, but it is the life I've now chosen. So, in conclusion, I wish you the best in your own work and love. I hope that your choices shape you in ways that you find pleasing and rewarding. Although you will never know for sure if your choices were the best ones you could have made, you should be okay with that. Accept and even welcome the times when things don't go according to plan. Because although I wish you much success, I also wish you many serendipitous mistakes and fortuitous failures. And of course, a happy graduation. So.